Hello everybody, Realm Builder Guy here, a very tired Realm Builder Guy here, and welcome back to Crusader Kings 3 and another guide for CK3, this one focusing on Italy. Before we get going, thank you again for all the likes, comments, subscriptions. Don't forget to do that now. Also go check out in the links. You will find my Twitter handle if you want to follow me there, as well as the link to the Discord server. So please come on over there and join the growing realm building community. So that's out of the way. Now we're going to talk about Italy in today's guide video. So, I've made no bones about the fact that I significantly favor the 1066 start. Now, you can alter your settings for the 867 start to kind of limit the border gore, but it still exists. I mean, there's only so much you can do. It's just a more stable game in 1066. But I do want to talk about a few key people here in 867. And then we're going to hop on over to what I, again, think is just the more interesting time frame in CK3 and also for Italy, which is 1066. So to start off here in 867, we're not going to worry about Italy, but we're going to talk about just a general, or the Kingdom of Italy, what the situation is. So you have a Carling king, King Louis II the Younger of Italy. Then you've got the Pope here. Then you've got a few Orthodox Sardinians here on, Sardinia. And you've got the Pope, of course, and then some southern states here. And then the Byzantines have a little bit of a foothold. And, of course, North African Islamic nations are in southern Italy at this time. So what is a possible strategy you can do here in 867? Well, I mean, you could do King Louis II the Younger, but I just find that in general really, really, really boring. So I'm going to dive into a few other nations here and what we could do there. Now, if you want to do the King of Italy, that's fine. Gobble up the south. Boom. Strategy done. But we're actually going to go south to start off with, and that is here in, if I get there, in Benevento. Benevento, we've got Prince Adelchis of Benevento of the Radicidi house. You got all the different Apulian houses, all the different titles down here in Benevento. In the Principality, it's a duchy tier realm, but they were a prince. Now, what's interesting about him, he was given the Principality to defend its ancient, supposedly, independence in southern Italy against the Lombardians from the north and the Byzantines from the east and the Saracens from the south. So that's why he kind of inherited or was given this title. Now, ironically, what happened was he actually steered away from the Carlings and the papacy and allied with the Byzantines. And one of the peculiar moments of history was when he actually kidnapped and robbed Louis the Younger of Italy, the Carling king and emperor of Italy. He called himself emperor of the Romans, even though he was technically just a king. That was kind of one of the more interesting things, and that kind of led to a lifelong feud between these two. And in fact, upon his release, Prince Adelchis told the king, well, I'll let you go, but you have to promise to never set foot in Benevento again. He said he would, and then the Pope said, nah, it's fine, don't worry about it. Adelchis, he allied with the Byzantines, and so I don't really care what he says. You can go back down there. And he always tried to exact revenge for that kidnapping and robbery, but it never really came off. Now, Prince Adelchis had a rather mysterious ending in 878 when he was assassinated, and nobody really knows by whom or why. It's conceivable that, the Carlings from the north kind of said, you gotta go. You gotta go. Now, the next ones I want to talk about here are right over here in Napoli. We've got Count Gregorius of Napoli from House Spartanos. Now, the house names made up. I couldn't find any reference to the exact house name, but Count Gregory was actually Duke Gregory because Naples was a duchy. And the reason why they're Greek Orthodox is because they were more aligned towards the Byzantines at the time, and they actually were a rather powerful force here in southern Italy. And they turned away more and more from the Pope and more away from the Emperor and the King, and allied with the Byzantines here, especially when it came to fighting against the Muslim invasion from North Africa. So what are the strategies you could do here with Benevento or Napoli? Well, obviously, you're going to have a hard time because you've got the powerful, more, or not weak at least, rulers here to the south, and then, of course, the Kingdom of Italy to the north. You kind of want to ally with these guys and then expand down south. I mean, Salerno is kind of one of those you try to gobble up pretty quickly, and you probably could. I mean, Napoli has more troops. Benevento has significantly more troops. So Salerno, before he allies with someone more powerful, this would be the most natural way to go. And then attacking the Savdanids, and then eventually trying to push out the Byzantines, who, if you time your war correctly, will definitely help you there. So I actually want to go down here to the south, but we're going to go to the Aghlabids. Now, the Aghlabids were actually, let me turn the page here real quick. The Aghlabids were the rulers of North Africa, and they eventually took over and conquered southern Italy over time. But their peak came just before Sultan Muhammad II Ibn Ahmad took control of the Aghlabids. Now, they're not reflecting it here. I did have a different Aghlabid ruler in a previous one that reflected it a little bit better. But Ibn Ahmad actually is, let's see here. Where's that it? No, here's the guy. This guy will take over. I've seen him take over a few times. And he is in control here. And he is actually Ibrahim Ibn Ahmad. He takes over for his brother. Right? Yes. And historically. And he is known as a homicidal maniac. That is the one thing he is known for. So this is actually one that could be really, really, really interesting in playing. You're down here, you eventually take over the Aghlabids and then take over Sicily. So Prince Ibrahim Ibn Ahmad, you can see it right here. Torturer, shrewd, lunatic, intelligent, melancholic, web weaver, ambitious, sadistic. I've had most of these traits pop up multiple times, especially lunatic. Lunatic and torturer come up every single time. He is set to take over for his liege. That's kind of the interesting story. The current ruler of the Aghlabids is the great ruler of the Aghlabids. After this guy right here, Ibrahim Ibn Ahmad, takes over, the Aghlabids start to fall apart, and eventually the Fatimids overthrow them, and then the Fatimid Empire gets born. So the interesting start here would actually be outside of Italy and then taking over Italy over time. Yes, you could go with Salimids, but they're in a very, very weak position. The more interesting play here would be to start as Prince Ibrahim Ibn Ahmad, kill the guy ahead of you, take over the Aghlabid Empire, and then conquer Italy from there. So that would be the significantly more interesting play there. Now, the final one in 867 I want to talk about, we're going to move up here, is actually a vassal here, and that is in Spoleto. We're going to talk about Spoleto just because it becomes rather powerful a couple of decades after the 867 start. And who we have here is Duke Lambert of Spoleto. Now, I have a little bit of a problem with this. Now, here, so you've got the house of Guideschi, which is the correct house, but Lambert actually isn't even born yet in 867. He gets born a little bit later, but he does become king of Italy and emperor of Italy as well. He gets named that by the Pope. So that's kind of an issue I have with 867. we're losing a little bit of the history here. His father, in fact, here we have him here, Guy or Guido of Spoleto, was the actual ruler at this time. Lambert didn't come in till later, but he's 17 years old. This would be a fantastic one to play. He's a very good character. Deceitful, cynical, skilled tactician, unyielding defender. I had that pop up a few times. And kind of roll up Italy from here and then overthrow your liege. I think that would be the most interesting one, especially given that you're only 17 years old. You still have a lot of time ahead of you, and you do have some claims here in the north, but you have all of these titles here. Now, there are a few other ones just in general mention. Tuscany could be an interesting one. Upper Burgundy is very interesting. Now, this is the older branch of the Welfs. Now, this is Count Conrad of Savoy, or Upper Burgundy. He did exist. This is the older branch of the Welfs, not the new ones that I talk about in 1066 in the HRE guide, and that I'll mention in this guide as well. But this is the older branch, and what's interesting about him are the high amount of claims up in France and in Switzerland that he has, and this is through his family ties. So you can expand there just because you have a lot of pressed claims. And this is the older Welf family in Upper Burgundy. Could be a very, very interesting one. You have a ton of siblings you're dealing with, including the Count of Anjou. You've got a couple of kids. You're not married. You're only 25 years old. This is a very good one. You can see he's Bavarian. So that's that connection to the Welfs of Germany. So this would be one that you could look at to start at a duke level as well within the Kingdom of Italy. But that is really it for 867. There are a few other interesting storylines here as well in Friuli or in the Provence, Genoa, and so on, or even down here, Cagliari or Gallura. But those are the ones that I highlight as the most interesting in the most problematic start date in CK3. But now we're going to head on over to 1066. So as you can see in 1066, the HRE, the Holy Roman Empire, and there's a guide that I made here on the channel about the HRE, and I omitted most of Italy because I knew I was going to do this guide eventually, but the HRE is in control in Italy. Now you do have some more minor Muslim states here in the south of Italy. Apulia is a rather big player. Napoli still exists. The papacy has expanded. You've got Capua as well as Salerno, the Principality of Salerno. Also an interesting play, but Napoli still exists with the same family. So if you want to play Greek Orthodox here in Italy, it's going to be very, very difficult because Apulia is extremely powerful. The papacy is actually relatively aggressive at times. And then you've got a rather powerful one here in central Italy that we will highlight as well. But I'm going to move to the north. And let's click on this. And we're going to go here first. As an honorable mention, the Bossonids in the Provence. The Bossonids are actually an older house. At this time, they really didn't have much power anymore. But if you go back into the 10th century, they actually had a few Italian kings. And the interesting play here would be to kind of gobble up maybe some of the lands around you, push into France, possibly create a kingdom here as well, and maybe reclaim the glory of old. So that's an honorable mention. But we want to go next door here to the Piedmont and to the House of Savoy. We have Duke Pierre of Piedmont, a bunch of titles. His wife has a lot of titles in France. So keep that in mind, including Aquitaine. But Pierre of Piedmont and of House Savoy, or Savoy. This is an interesting one because they, of course, are extraordinarily famous. Now, they dominated the region and eventually becoming kings of Italy under the name of the House of Savoy Piedmont. They actually still exist today, and they only were allowed to return to Italy since 2002 after the 1946 exile. Now, they were the kings that unified Italy in the 19th century. So Savoy Piedmont, a very historically significant house that is around this time. So maybe the cool play here would be to take this house and see if you can replicate that and become the king of Italy and kind of, get away from the HRE. Now, I've started them a few times, and you quickly get actually the emperor gives you a few of your neighbors here, so you grow in size quickly. And I've started the save about 3 or 4 times, can't remember, and every single time, one or both of Geneva and Bern were given to me. So maybe not expand there just yet. Have it come into your domain and kind of grow naturally from there. Now, Pierre himself was not a major ruler. The key thing here is, of course, you have a wife with a ton of unpressed and some pressed claims in France. So that does make it interesting because pressed claims can be inherited, unpressed claims cannot. So maybe look at a few of those unpressed claims and press them and expand into France as well. And keep an eye on Provence. I wouldn't worry about Lombardy or Tuscany just at this point. I would worry about Provence next to you and maybe expanding to the sea from there. Now we're going to move right next door to Lombardy. Now I did mention this house in the HRE guide, and this is Alberto IV Azzo of Lombardy from the house Obertenghi, and he actually is the founder of the house Este, which lasted until the 19th century in Italy and southern Germany and so on. He's 57 years old at the start here. He's got a few kids, including Viv, who I talk about in the HRE guide, so I'm not going to talk about him now. Go check that guide out. He actually lived till he was almost 100 years old, which is a pretty long life now, but it was already a pretty long life then. You can see all of his titles and claims are local here. His wife has claims as well in France, so that's something to keep an eye on there. They are both pressed, so they can be inherited by Viv. Now, Viv, I have played this a few times, and I've also watched it a few times. He can inherit some titles in Bavaria, where he is right now, but more often than not, he inherits titles here and in France and becomes a little border-gory, but he becomes super powerful quite often. But Lombardy would be an interesting one, especially given that you do have some holdings down here as well. The natural play is to try to eat away at Tuscany. We're going to talk about it in a second. And Piedmont, and maybe try to see if you can get Viv to become king of Bavaria. That would be an interesting play as well. So now, let's head on over to Tuscany. And of course, we have to talk about one of the most interesting people, not just in medieval Europe, but I'd say in world history, and that is Duchess Matilda of Tuscany. House Canossa, that's kind of an old house, because that's where she built her castle, and that's where that house name comes from. Her father was Duke Bonifacio of Tuscany. Her mother, who I also talk about in the HRE guide, is actually married to the Duke of Lower Lorraine. So you've got quite a few claims here in Italy, which is kind of nice, as well as a ton of titles. Now, Matilda of Tuscany, what makes so interesting, she is a woman in a extraordinarily male-dominated time frame in the Middle Ages. And she had some great military and especially diplomatic victories, and came to dominate most of northern Italy. Now, her family and herself were deeply involved in papal politics, and she supported Pope Gregory VII in the investiture controversy against technically her liege, Emperor Henry IV, who she was an adversary of her entire life, and outlived Henry. And upon his death, and then shortly after, in the year 1111, the Pope named her Vice Queen of Italy. What's also to note, she was very devout and founded over 100 churches, supposedly. You can see diligent, zealous, that pops up every time I start one here. Charismatic negotiator, also very good diplomatically, as you can see here, high diplomacy skills. Learning not so much, but she was very, very devout, and you can see that with zealous trait. That's obviously also about piety there as well. She's already named Imperial Vicar, which is very important, but she only gets named Imperial Vicar actually in 1111, but they decided to start her as Imperial Vicar now, because that's an important part of her story. So what do you do with Matilda? Well, you've got a lot of these city-states right here. The natural thing was bring your realm together And then you can either go south outside of the HRE or try to take on Lombardy or Carinthia. I'm not going to talk about Carinthia, Canton, because I talk about them in the HRE guide, so go check that one out. So for me, the most natural play that I did a couple of times, and I've seen other people do as well, is obviously these city-states. They're just there for the picking. You've got an extraordinarily powerful military. Build a couple of alliances. You're not married, you're 20 years old, and no kids. Want to get married, matrilineal marriage, of course. You want to make sure it's your house and you're in control, so keep that in mind. Now, next, I do want to talk about one of her vassals, and that is right here, Count Jacopo of Orvieto of House Orsini. Now, House Orsini, they are obscure here, but they are not obscure historically. Historically, they are extremely relevant because they had 3 popes. Now, if you ever watched, I can't remember if it's in the Medici show, but it's definitely in the show The Borgias. Orsini is a very powerful papal and papal Vatican house, and so this is a more minor house here, but you start off, you're not a pope or anything, even the open terrain expert, military, let's see, forgiving. I had a few of these traits pop out as well, but this is an interesting small one. If you want to start really small, you've got pretty high domain limit. Arezzo next to you would be a natural one to try to go into. Now they're more powerful than you. You're 27, you're not married, but you do have an heir, you have a child. It's just an interesting one historically, so I figured I would highlight it. Now, next we are moving south, and this is an interesting one as well. And we're going to look at Duke Robert the Fox of Apulia, Robert d'Hauteville, or also known as Robert Guiscard. I did mention him once previously because he oftentimes led military campaigns against the Byzantines. You could see the Byzantines are already gone here. Historically, they still had a foothold in Bari, and he pushed them out. So here, he's already pushed them out. Now, he is Norman. You can see that as well. And the Normans in southern Italy, they got hired as mercenaries in wars against the Byzantines. Well, they couldn't quite shake their Viking heritage and decided, you know what, we're just going to stay here and become a force. And in 1044, they really did start putting down roots in southern Italy. The most interesting one was just by the name of Drogo. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, of course, Drogo means something to you there as well, but not quite the same thing. Now, but Robert Guiscard, he was the head of a chief of roving robber bands, is what he was known. I mean, he was a mercenary, really what it was. But to kind of appease him a little bit in his younger years, he was given land in Calabria. And then over time, he expanded and he fought versus the Pope and the Lombards. But when the investiture controversy hit that I mentioned before between the Pope and Emperor Henry IV, the Pope actually recognized the Norman rule in southern Italy because he realized he needed allies against the emperor. So he did that. Plus, he also wanted a strong ally here to the south of him against the Byzantines because, again, you know, it's the Pope. And you still had Muslim forces in Sicily. Now, Robert, together with his brother, Count Roger of Messina, would be a very interesting one to start as, rolled up in here and kind of kicked out the remaining Muslim forces just shortly after the 1080s, somewhere in there. But Robert Guiscard, very, very interesting. Now, what can you do strategically? Well, I started this one now a few times just to see and play test and see how it plays initially. And how it plays initially is really interesting because Matilda of Tuscany attacks Apulia almost every single time. Now, you would think you could take on Salerno, Napoli, Capua, but in fact, they ally with her. If you're trying to take over the rest of Sicily, you're going to get attacked from the north. So what you want is ignore Sicily for now. get a strong alliance in the north so you are able to defend against Matilda, because she's going to press claims or fabricate claims and then press claims against you in this reach right here. So look north before you look south. Maybe try to defeat these city-states here. That gives you obviously some strength. And then you can eventually turn down to Sicily. But if you look at Sicily first, more times than not, Matilda is going to start rolling in your territory right here, and you're going to get into trouble. So keep that in mind for playing with Robert de Hauteville if you want to play with as a powerful duke. Now, if you want to start as Roger of Messina, the brother and vassal of Robert, this is a little bit different. Now, the interesting thing here is you don't have to worry so much about the lands up here. Here, I would look at trying to take over Sicily as soon as possible. And you don't necessarily need your brother. It definitely helps as you're trying to take them on bit by bit. Maybe try to go for the guy in the middle here first and then expand on the side so you can knock them out pretty quickly, because they do have claims on Sicily. So if you're going to play as Roger, then Sicily is something I would definitely look at doing. If you're going to play as Robert, I wouldn't worry about Sicily just yet. I would worry more about your northern border. So I hope that helped you a little bit with Italy and some options that you have. No, I didn't highlight every single state because I don't need these videos going 40, 50 minutes to an hour. That just doesn't work. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let me know in the comments if you've played anywhere in Italy so far in CK3 and how that's gone for you. So until next time, I am Realm Builder Guy, and I will talk to you soon.